Okay, we're live. We'll be starting in less than a minute. More people are jumping in. Okay, we'll start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. So this evening, I want to talk about one of the uh, characteristics of the Dhamma, which is Akaliko. There are several epithets or characteristics that are applied to the Dhamma: Pasako, Opanayako. Akaliko is the one I'm focusing on today. Akaliko means timeless. Kali is time. A is the negative prefix, and the ko at the end just makes it into a noun. It's sort of like the English ness. So akaliko is literally timelessness or timeless. And this is an interesting word because I think it can be interpreted on different levels. It has different applications or meanings, how you want to focus on it, and they're all valid. First of all, the teaching, the Dhamma, is timeless because its teachings are really independent of historical or cultural circumstances. They're just as valid today as they were in ancient India. The Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, three characteristics, these things are not dependent on particular historical circumstances. They're universal, timeless teachings. That said, I think for a deep reading of the suttas, the scriptures, one should be aware of the cultural context, because although it doesn't matter for the essence of the teachings, it does reflect in the style and the context of the teachings. And you can get a deeper understanding of the teachings if you try and avoid reading them with a modernist perspective, but try and put yourself into the spirit of the time and place that the Buddha was giving the teachings. Because we always have to remember that the discourses in the suttas represent actual encounters with real people at a real time and place. This is particularly true of many of the suttas that are in the form of dialogue. So the Buddha was actually discussing points of Dhamma with real people who had a place and a time and a cultural condition that they were already living in. I'll give you an example of how this works on both levels. Is the teaching of anatta, not self, which is central, very crucial teaching in Buddhism. And the truth of this teaching is timeless. This applies to the nature of human beings in any period in history. But the particular formulation and that choice of that word anatta is very Indian, because uh, what the Buddha was critiquing or speaking against was the prevalent view of the Atman. In the Pali, Atta is the Pali version of Sanskrit Atman. Atman was the philosophical standard, I would say, in India. Um, it's a term that's used widely in the Upanishads and then later in the Bhagavad Gita. Uh, it refers to the imperishable, unchanging essence of a human being that passes from birth to birth. So it's somewhat like the Western idea of a soul, but it has its own particular Indian flavor. So the Buddha was uh, definitely had that in mind, that this is what he was uh, uh, speaking in opposition to when he formulated the teaching of Atta. And this is, for example, when he was teaching Anatta, he often emphasized the changeable aspect of the aggregates. You know, that the aggregates are impermanent; they come and go, and there's nothing to be found outside the aggregates. So there's no permanent, fixed essence. And then this is um, it's not explicit in the suttas, but it's definitely expanded into the Abhidhamma to say there's no essence in anything. Every Dhamma that arises is without a self essence, a swabhava, which is again is an Indian philosophic concept. Another example is the very central example is the Four Noble Truths. Now, sometimes it occurs to people to wonder why they're given in the order they are. The first noble truth, second noble truth, that makes sense, but then it seems like the third and fourth should be uh, logically turned around. We should have the path, and then the result is the final step. And whether that change were made or not would not change, obviously, the truth or essence of the teaching. And the teaching remains valid in whatever form it's expressed. The underlying idea is timeless in that sense. But the particular form is definitely culturally bound. The Buddha often would use forms and language and ideas from the prevailing culture and give them his own kind of twist. And the form of the Four Noble Truths is formulated in the style of ancient Indian Vedic medical texts, taking our existence in samsara as the fundamental disease that seeks a cure. And the standard way of the standard formula used in these texts would be a fourfold. It would begin with a description of the disease. So dukkha is the disease. So we would call that the symptoms. Then it would talk about the cause of the disease, which might be overeating or exposure to heat or whatever they came up with for it. The cause of the disease, and here it's the desire is the cause of suffering. And then the third part of the medical description would be the prognosis. What can we expect as this disease develops? Is it curable or is it terminal? Right? So the Buddha says in the case of samsaric existence, there is a cure, it's nibbana. And then finally, the last section would be the treatment. So obviously, we have the Four Noble Truths as the path to realize the cure. So the form in which the Four Noble Truths are, particular formulation and the ordering is culturally bound. So just as a general rule, when you're reading the sutta material, I think it really helps if you try and put yourself imaginatively in the framework of ancient India. What were people at that time and place making of these teachings? How did they understand it? And I think that way you can better penetrate to the timeless core of the teaching. It's very difficult it's a very difficult intellectual or conceptual exercise for people to step outside of their cultural conditioning and to see that all these all cultural conditioning is relative and dependent on, like everything else in samsara actually is dependent on cause and conditions. You have the presuppositions of a modern person living in whatever country you live in, and you've been influenced in numerous ways from childhood. So you have a certain cultural matrix. And if your understanding is limited to that, you will never truly penetrate the meaning of the teachings. A deeper meaning of the word Akaliko is that the highest or subtlest Dhamma is Nibbana, the unconditioned, and that is timeless. That's Akaliko in the metaphysical sense, because it's outside of all conditioned structures and forms, which include space and time. So when we have a list of the characteristics of Nibbana given all in the negative, in the Udana, the unconditioned, the uncreated, and so on, Ajata, Amata, Asankata. This is, first of all, being given in the negative is because we cannot define Nibbana in terms, but because words and concepts are bound to samsara, they're bound to conditioning. So we can, however, express what it is not. So it's entirely negative terms, and one of them is amata, which means the undying. Which means does not mean eternal, because eternal would be expressed as nitya. Eternal, if it was eternal, that would imply a existence within time, extended indefinitely, whereas undying implies outside of time. It's not born and it doesn't die. It's not, time is not relative to it. It cannot be expressed in terms of time. The concept of time is a kind of subtle metaphysical difficulty in Buddhist history. The understanding of the nature of time was actually the main doctrinal dispute between the Theravada and the Sarvastivada, who split at the time of the Third Council, although the Theravada was not called Theravada at that time, they were called Vibhajyavadins, that they're the ones that became Theravada. The Sarvasta Vada, the name means all exists. And the Vibhajyavadins, the name means the school of analysis or the school of discrimination. The Sarvastivada or Sarvastivada, Sanskrit name, held that all three times, past, present, and future, exist. And one way of interpreting this that I've seen that I find kind of appealing as an idea is that consciousness is outside of time. It's a eternal present. It only exists in the present, but it doesn't move from the present. And the rest of the universe, all the things that we perceive with consciousness, arises in the future and falls backwards through time and becomes the past. And consciousness is only aware of objects that are passing that point. So that was the Sarvastivadin interpretation. So all exists. Whereas the Theravada or the Vibhajyavadins, as they called themselves at the time, discriminated or analyzed time into the three categories. And they said that only the present moment is real, because the past is ceased to exist and the future is not yet manifest. And there's also an elaboration of that view in Tibetan, the Yoga of the Three Times, that says that even the present is unreal because it cannot be fixed. And as soon as you look at it, it's already the past. But in any case, however we interpret the nature of time, it is bound to samsara because it moves, it's subject to conditionality. Whereas nibbana is outside of time. You could also interpret, a related point, you could interpret Akaliko as meaning that the Dhamma is timeless in the sense that it arises in an instant. It does, at the actual moment of awakening, it's a single instant. So it's not a prolonged duration in time. You could also, in another aspect that occurs to me is, you could take from Abhidhamma, and this was another point that was controverted, was what is the duration of a single Dhamma, a single mind moment. And one school of thought held that it has no duration, that it's instantaneous in the sense, in the mathematical sense, it's used in calculus. It's a moment that can be located in time but has no duration. So then the actual fabric of reality, which is composed of dhammas, in that interpretation is itself timeless. There is no persistence, and this would be a deep meaning of impermanence or anicca. There's no persistence at all, even on a very small time scale. So those are a few different interpretations of Akaliko, and I'll stop there and take questions. See if anyone has any, and I'll stop there and take questions. So if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody typing into the chat. I hope the stream is not frozen again. I'm speaking into the wind. Okay, no, it's alive. Someone's opinion. Do you have any views on the Nai Bunman tradition of samatha meditation? I understand it's a tradition that Ajahn Brahm first heard meditation from. I don't know. I know some of Ajahn Brahm's method and teaching, but I've never heard of Nai Bunman. I don't know anything about it, so I won't comment. Is there a way to fall back out of nirvana into samsara? Not after one has entered parinibbana at death. Then, in the Theravada view, that's it. There's no more re-arising after that. Can we benefit from the Dhamma even if we're skeptical about the supernatural teachings? Yes, I would say. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how you would define the supernatural teachings. I think what would require having faith is faith in the Four Noble Truths. Beyond that, I don't think it's required. Is it correct to say the future has already been made, but you can change it? But you can change it along the way due to your actions. No, I wouldn't say that's correct. I think in either view, the two views of time that I laid out, neither one would hold that the future is necessarily fixed. I don't think we can say that it's already determined, because there is the element of free will. Uh, 3 weeks ago, before your feed broke up, you mentioned something interesting, that samsara is less a place and more something we are doing. Could you go a bit more into that? Yes, yeah, I'll expand on that idea. We talk about samsara. I think it's generally people interpret it as a kind of a state of being, or almost like a place in a sort of metaphysical sense, but it's really more an action. It's something we do. We make it moment by moment. When your mind craves an object and takes an object, then you're doing samsara. And that's what we've been essentially doing for who knows how many lifetimes, moment by moment. The nature of the mind is to crave an object, and there's a kind of a wish or an intention that's in that impulse, that the mind wants to complete itself, or find some kind of ultimate satisfaction in the object. But because the objects are dukkha, they're not themselves perfect or complete, and there's no way they can satisfy the mind, then the mind immediately jumps to the next object with the same idea, which is not a expressed idea. It's an underlying kind of impulse, and it's that action of craving and grasping that is samsara. And when that is not done, when that you just stop doing that, then that's nibbana. Next one. If the future hasn't been made, then how can people have visions of the future, including the Buddha saw the future? Yeah, I think it is possible to have visions of the future. The Buddha talked about that, and with many anecdotes about that. I think that that's kind of a, a bit mysterious, but the way I would think of it is that there's a very strong tendency for certain things to happen due to cause and effect. And the future is not entirely fixed. Some things are unpredictable. We don't know because we don't know the movements of free will. But there are probably very strong causal factors that are very likely to occur. Um, for example, if if I predict that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow morning, that's a pretty safe prediction because the movement of the earth and is such a strong physical tendency. It's very unlikely that it won't occur. Does Theravada Buddhism hold a view on free will then? Presumably this is however constrained by the impact of past karma. Yes, free will, what we call free will, it's sort of, in a way, it's the Western debate between determinism and free will is sort of not really applicable. It's because of the teaching of not self. There is no self that makes a decision, but there is a mental factor of chaitana, which can go in, which is volition, which can go in different directions. And like everything else, it's conditioned, but being conditioned doesn't mean it's absolutely determined. But what it does mean in practice is that it's difficult to exercise true freedom because the path of least resistance is to just go along with our habit-formed karma. But it is always possible to break out of that and do something new. That possibility remains. And that's exercising of chaitana, which occurs in the javana moments in the Abhidhamma. Question from Bolivia. I am envious of my cousin who is about to graduate from university when I'm not able to do so. How can I overcome my envy? You should practice mudita, a sympathetic joy. Do that as a meditation. Read up on the practice of mudita. It's like practicing metta, but it's specialized in that you focus on the wish may beings continue to enjoy the happiness they have attained. So you develop a sympathetic joy for your cousin. Instead of being envious of your cousin, you think, oh, how wonderful, my cousin is enjoying this happiness of graduating in engineering. Isn't that great? So try and train your mind to think in that way. Plato said it's impossible to say anything true about material world because material world is always changing. He also arrived at anicca. Yeah, I think the ancient Greeks had some idea of anicca. Heraclides, who was a predecessor of Plato, he's one of his most famous teachings is you cannot step into the same river twice. Because the river is always flowing and it's a different river every time you step in it. So this idea of constant change was something that was an idea that was considered and known to the Greeks. They also, though, I think, generally tended towards a eternalist view of at least at the atomic level. So it wasn't entirely an established teaching among them. Karma is made at or in what time? Karma is made in the present moment by the exercise of chaitana or free will that I spoke about earlier. Whenever you do something intentionally with body, speech, or mind, then you're making karma. And then that can arise as a resultant. The result of that can arise at any time in the future. How would you differentiate something that is Akaliko and something that is Nietzsche? Nietzsche would imply, as I said, a prolongation through time without an ending. Nietzsche means permanent. So something that is still within time but doesn't end, would be called Nietzsche. But Akaliko means outside of time, not affected by time. So you can't say it's present or past or future. Why is it said the future is not yet existing and not existing at all? There is no way to anticipate it in its entirety. I'm not sure I understand the question. Why is it said that the future is not yet existing and not existing at all, since there is no way to anticipate it in its entirety? Yeah, I'm not really sure there's a question there, but yeah, and that interpretation, which is the mainstream Theravada interpretation, is the future does not exist because it hasn't manifested. It only exists in our imagination. It's not a real entity yet. In Sutta Nipata or Samyutta Nikaya 41.6, Chitta asks, "But sir, when is one emerged from Nirodha Sampati? How many kinds of contact do we experience?" And the Buddha replies, "They experience three kinds of contact. Uh, Emptiness, signless, and undirected contacts. I have heard you say that Nirodha Sampati is abiding in Nibbana, but this sutta seems to imply that Nibbana occurs when you emerge from cessation." Um, yeah, I'm not sure how to interpret that. Emptiness, sinuso, sunya, and nimitta, an undirected context. I'm not sure what the Pali for that would be. But yeah, the mind emerging from Nura Sampati would be extremely aware and keen, and it would see into emptiness and signlessness, etc. That's not. I don't think that implies that it's still in Nibbana. Uh, Bad karma from a past existence. What role does self-forgiveness and kindness play in rectifying your path forward? I hear this is fundamental. Yeah, yeah. You should have self-forgiveness and kindness towards yourself, and not being plagued by guilt about past errors is not fruitful. It's not beneficial in any way. But it doesn't negate the effects of the karma. The karma will come to fruition regardless. But if you plague yourself with guilt, you're just multiplying the karma. So the best thing is to recognize I have done wrong. This is causing bad results, and to make a resolution not to err in that way in the future. What happens to the karma if one who becomes an arahant? Well, until he dies, he still has residual karma, as even the Buddha had experienced some painful situations in his life. But the karma is attenuated. It's not as severe as it would be if one is still unenlightened. But when the arahant dies, enters parinibbana, all that karma is just lost. It no longer has any effect in the world. I had a dream that someone close to me died. The next day, events from that dream were exactly the same. That I would save the person because I knew how they died. And I manifest the event. Um, yeah, I would say that that's an example of that's actually an interesting example because first of all, it's a vision of the future, but it shows that the future is not absolutely fixed. By your exercise of free will, you were able to change it. So it's like you had a warning from the future, and you were able to act upon it. The karma is all that happens in the present moment, which cannot be measured. Yes, yeah, it's karma is made in the present moment, and we can't know the full implications of the karma. It's not possible for our mind to fully grasp or understand all the unfolding of that. In the beginning of Corpus Hermeticum, a description similar to jhana is given. Could the author have unwittingly tapped into jhana? Yeah, quite possibly. Particularly teachings around jhana, they were found outside of Buddhism, certainly in India and probably all over the world. Uh, uh, can you explain how nibbana can directly experience if there is no consciousness? Uh, can you explain how nibbana can directly experience if there is no consciousness? Um, well, you keep doing this. This same questioner. You keep trying to define or grasp nibbana with the intellect. Just give up on that. It's not. You're not going to be able to. You set up these sort of puzzle questions about nibbana, and they can't really be answered. It's because we can't grasp it with our mind. We can't understand it with the intellect. So we really should just give it up. Is nibbana outside time? Yes, that was kind of the point of the talk. When I desire something strongly, it is hard for me to see the suffering caused by it. I only feel more desire. Is self-compassion a good tool to crystallize the suffering in a desired object? Yeah, you definitely have compassion for yourself and realize, if I and this is one of the contemplations around a desired object is to consider the consequences. If I take this desired object, it's going to cause me more suffering. It may cause me momentary pleasure, but longer term suffering. And to actually contemplate that with the mind. In Ajahn Mahabu's book, he said the radiant mind before becoming arahant is like comparing dung and gold and knowing which is superior. Even though anagamis had destroyed 5 fetters, do you think an anagami's mind is still dung in comparison to an arahant? I don't think he would call it dung, but I mean, first of all, that's a kind of very Thai forest tradition way of speaking about things, using kind of earthy similes. Um, but there's a relativity there. The mind of an anagami is extremely subtle compared to the mind of an ordinary person, but it's still coarse and confused compared to the mind of an arahant. So there's a relativity of these different mental states. Question: Mudita should be practiced on spiritual qualities of an individual, isn't it? Not low qualities. No, no, you're wrong. If you read the section in the Visuddhimagga that a poor man sees a wealthy man riding on a elephant covered in jewels and adorned, it's sort of like the ancient Indian equivalent of seeing somebody in a fancy BMW or something. Um, this guy's got a really, really great ride. The poor man sees that. If he's practicing mudita, it would bring him joy and think, what happiness that man enjoys riding on his elephant. May he continue to enjoy that happiness. So that's an extremely worldly example. It doesn't necessarily mean only spiritual happiness. You once said both samsara and nibbana are sunya. Could you expand on that? Yeah, the sunya or sunyata and emptiness, voidness, is the only one of the 3 characteristics that applies to both samsara and nibbana. Nibbana is void because it's without substance. It's inherently, we can't positively state that about Nibbana because it is essentially a negative. It's void. It's non. Uh, it's non-substantial. But so is samsaric existence. If it's analyzed, to a fine level, we see it's also without inherent substance. Could you explain the difference between dukkha and arati? Uh, Honestly, I'm not sure what that. I should know that, but that slipped my mind now. I don't know what. Maybe it may come to me. If it comes to me, I'll come back to that question. Could you possibly deconstruct a Nietzsche in one of your talks? Thank you. Okay, I can possibly do that. I think I've done that before. Do you think most practicing monks reach stream entry, or is it still very rare? Oh, Arati is one of the three daughters of Mara. Yeah. How's it usually translated as discontent? I think. Um, well, Arati would be an aspect of dukkha. It would be a form of suffering, but it's kind of specialized. So that's how I would relate it to dukkha. Do you think most monks reach stream entry? I don't know if I would say most, or there's no way of knowing who from the outside who has attained what. My suspicion is it's not all that rare as some people think, but it's not real common or necessary either. Why is sunyata apparently the main concept between Mahayana Zen teachings? In what sense is the sunyata any different than the sunyata of Theravada school? Thank you. I actually don't think there is any difference from what I've seen of. Now, I have to qualify that by saying I'm not as nearly as well studied in Mahayana teachings as I am in Theravada, but I've not found really any difference in the idea of sunyata from what I've seen. I think it's really just a difference of emphasis. Like in Theravada, the idea of sunya and the word sunya is used um, in some places, but more commonly you'll see the word anatta, not self. That was the emphasis of the teaching, because the emphasis I think is a practical one, in that the Buddha was his whole teaching career was devoted to liberating beings. So he wasn't concerned with expounding on metaphysical questions. That came later. So the idea of the external world and the natural world of samsara being empty, being void, although you can find that in the Theravada, it's not really a main theme, because the critical thing for realizing liberation is to realize the emptiness of self, which is like a narrow case or a special case of sunyata. I've heard stories of beings outside time. In this case, would it be fair to say that such beings should not be possible? I don't know. I don't know how you would classify a being as outside of time. What's really meant by that? I think it could be in. There's another way of thinking about time would be some of the modern uh, physicists' view of time as being. I think that this is really Einstein's idea: is time as a fourth dimension, not so different from space. So someone could be outside of time in that sense, I suppose. I think Nagarjuna would say that the Abhidhamma idea of Dhammas contradict the doctrine of emptiness because Dhammas imply a temporary swabhava. Yes, I think that was Nagarjuna's critique, um, uh, or at least that was one of his critiques of the idea of Dhammas. Um, Another one of his critiques was that the idea of a sequence of dhammas is not possible because one cannot cause one cannot be the cause of something that if it's already ceased to be. Um, I know this was in later Abhidhamma, because Abhidhamma continued to develop for centuries with commentaries and sub-commentaries, and there's a lot of philosophical back and forth. And I know there was definitely a view that the Dhammas had no duration. A very good book that looks at some of these kind of philosophical subtleties around Abhidhamma in a historical context is Theravada Abhidhamma. I can't remember the name of the author offhand. It's a really well written, interesting book that doesn't treat the Abhidhamma teachings as a static picture, but shows a development and brings up some of the controversies. Wouldn't it be dangerous to rejoice in worldly happiness of others? What if the BMW the other was acquired by evil means? Well, rejoicing in spiritual happiness is always safe. Yeah, you have a point. If there's this spiritual happiness, you can express mudita towards. If the BMW was stolen or carjacked or something, then you didn't do it, and that you're rejoicing in that person's present moment happiness. It's not approving of his deeds. Um, it's just basically a way of countering envy. It's just basically a way of countering envy. You try and take joy in other beings' success and well being. It's not not judgmental. Like if you see a predator, let's say you see a hawk killing a sparrow, you can have mudita for the hawk at the same moment you have karuna for the sparrow. Is it possible to take rebirth in the past? No, I don't. I don't think it is. It's never. It seems like there's the arrow of time applies to rebirth. Metta is the only one that doesn't cause me to become extremely distressed after doing it all day long, but it's very hard to carry or generate the feeling compared to other meditation. Can you give some advice? Well, you shouldn't feel distressed doing karuna or mudita. I think the mistake with karuna, the mistake that people make, and this is kind of spoken about in the Suyamaga as well, is that karuna does not mean that you're suffering with the being. You shouldn't. You should wish the suffering ends, but it shouldn't make you feel sad. You should the suffering. Uh, that's considered the danger in karuna, like doing it wrong. With mudita, it would be passing over from rejoicing in the other person's happiness to kind of a vicarious fantasy of happiness. So you see the person riding the elephant, and instead of just rejoicing in their happiness, you imagine yourself riding the elephant and feeling happy about it. So there's subtleties in doing these meditations properly. Meow Kitty, yeah, she's being noisy today. I think she's probably a little digestive issues going on there. If these dhammas exist for a point instant, are they technically Akaliko by this logic? Yeah, I think I was implying that as one of the interpretations of Akaliko is that the very foundation of conditioned existence could be seen as Akaliko if we take that interpretation of dhammas. Is this the book you mean, Theravada Abhidhamma by Y. Karunadasa? Yes, that's exactly the book. Thank you for finding that. Okay, take a couple more here, then we'll call it. Could you share some thoughts about Adi Buddha? That's a concept that's outside of Theravada, and we don't have any such ideas, Adi Buddha in Theravada. As I understand it, and I may misrepresent it because I'm not a real expert on it, but it's a late Mahayana idea of a kind of creator Buddha that emanates the universe. And my suspicion it was is that it was it arose late in the medieval period, probably in reaction to the incoming monotheistic religions that puts an emphasis on creator gods, particularly Islam, that would have made an impact in India at that time. Is it possible that the Abrahamic god is a Brahma from a Theravada point of view? Yeah, I think that is very possible. That the Abrahamic god, Jehovah or Yahweh, whatever you name him, could have been an interaction with an actual Brahma. If you read the Baka, the sutta about Baka in the Majjhima Nikaya, when the Buddha encounters the Brahma Baka, and Baka lists off his qualities, sounds very much like an Old Testament God. He's the All Father, the All Creator, the, the first and only, on and on like that. Okay, so I'll leave it there, and I'll see you all next week with we'll come up with something different to talk about. Okay, bye all. Okay.